Equilar has reported the median total compensation for America's top 100 CEOs reached $22.3 million in 2022, an increase of 7.7% among the same companies from 2021. Apple's Tim Cook had a total compensation of $200 million. Median stock awards for the top executives increased by 19.7% to $13.8 million in 2022, the largest increase across all components. The average base compensation among U.S. CEOs was $510,000 in 2023, and the average cash bonus received in 2022 was $390,000, for a total average cash compensation of $908,000. The CEO pay ratio reached 288 to 1 across the Equilar 100 list in 2022. In comparison, last year's list saw a ratio of 254 to 1. The growing CEO pay ratio continues to draw the ire of the average employee and is a force multiplier in annihilating the American middle class. As for the top corporations, Apple led the way with a 2022 revenue of over $394 billion, twice as high as the next largest revenue, Microsoft at $198.3 billion. Amazon, the biggest beneficiary, has evolved into the apex predator of the American economy. But it is also the canary in our American mine. It signals dire economic, political, and social danger for the rest of us. It is a natural, predictable evolution. Nation-state-based corporations, headquartered here and abroad, continue to evolve, seeking lower costs overseas, massing capital for mergers and acquisitions while becoming bigger and bigger, consolidating immense power. These mega-powerful transnational organizations now shape all major national and state legislation. Meanwhile, media conglomerates mold public opinion to achieve a single overriding purpose: to make the maximum profit possible for their executives and stockholders. Transnational corporations will always seek to maximize profits by lowering labor costs, reducing regulatory limits, and owning materials. A computer system engineer earning $40,000 a year in Bombay is more competitive than a peer earning $140,000 a year in Silicon Valley. As a result of globalization, the only secure domestic American jobs are the ones that can only be done locally, like auto repair, intensive in-home nursing, or waitressing. Current job growth projections are for 7 out of 10 newly created jobs to be service sector jobs paying at or near minimum wage with little or no benefits. Those who argue that millions of new jobs, to replace those lost, are just around the corner haven't been able to tell anyone what or where that will be. Just because something has happened before doesn't necessarily mean it will happen again. Yes, it is true that in the early 1900s buggy whip manufacturers went out of business and were replaced with millions of automobile assembly jobs. This doesn't mean that the American economy will create millions of biomedical technologist jobs to replace all the lost automobile assembly line workers. There are 200 times more potential employees in China alone than in all the United States. A prior chief executive of Intel, Craig Barrett, summed up this reality: "I don't think this has been fully understood by the United States." If you look at India, China, and Russia, they all have strong education heritages. Even if you discount 90% of the people there as uneducated farmers, you still end up with about 300 million people who are educated. That's bigger than the U.S. workforce. Unless you are a plumber, or perhaps a newspaper reporter, or one of these jobs which is geographically situated, you can be anywhere in the world and do just about any job. Although some will be able to move up from the middle class into affluence, the vast majority will continue to spiral downward to the bottom rung of the economy. This trend is manifested in the significant sales growth of high-end retailers like Saks and Nordstrom, but the minimal profit growth for low-end retailers like Walmart led to the demise of mid-range retailers such as JCPenney. Over the past 60 years, tens of millions of American frogs have been boiled. At the same time, a few bloated American frogs grew filthy rich. The godfather of fascism, Benito Mussolini, said of it, "Fascism should more properly be called corporatism, since it is the merger of state and corporate power." In America today, fascists favor a democratically elected, but all-powerful, chief executive, an eviscerated legislature, and a compliant judiciary. The only significant difference between 1920s fascists and those now is that today's fascists rule the only superpower in the world. The Alpha Network has a purpose to expand its constituent wealth, power, influence, and social-cultural worldview. Wealthy, well-educated, and politically/socially conservative, they are 21st-century robber barons without a Teddy Roosevelt foe. The members are autocratic, militaristic, and often fundamentalist Christians. Alpha Network members fill and rotate between senior state and federal governments, corporate executives, investment banking, political lobbying, and various supportive positions, example as consultants, authors, and pundits in the media. This self-appointed aristocracy is centered on families of the American ultra-rich, who comprise an estimated 650,000 households, or about 0.5% of all American families. Roughly 700 billionaires and 18 million millionaires control over one-third of all U.S. investment assets. It is vital to understand that Alpha Network organizes and advances its business interests through transnational corporations. Although these businesses may be headquartered in the United States, they are not loyal institutions. Transnational corporations are amoral, valuing profit over all else, including patriotism. It is important to note that many employee pension funds, as well as millions of self-directed retirement funds, own their stocks, but have no power to influence them. Most Americans are oblivious to these realities because they are mesmerized by the Alpha Network's elaborate ongoing game of three-card Monte. That is the game where three cards are shuffled face down and the unwitting Mark invariably loses his money because he can't figure out where his card ended up. The dealer is the Alpha Network, the dealer's voice is the mass media, the shuffled cards are distorted facts, Wall Street is the table, and the money lost is ours. The Alpha Network currently controls all the significant levers of power. These levers of power are the leadership positions in the transnational corporations, the Wall Street brokerage houses and banks, the media, the Christian churches, and in the federal government. Just like the Internet's strength lies in the distribution of its routers and servers, the strength of the Alpha Network lies in the distribution of its power. Over the past 60 years, the tentacles of corporate organization and worldview have worked their way into every facet of American life, from Congress to the military, to the media, to education, to consumer rights, they are everywhere. Their worldview, with its goal of squeezing more out of less, operating free of any regulations, and diverting the maximum amount of public tax revenues and debt spending to corporate coffers is both pervasive and irreversible. Transnational corporations have morphed into what used to be domestic, national corporations into global fiefdoms. What is most important about that realization is to understand that hundreds of American named and based transnational corporations are taking American worker investment capital and profits from U.S. domestic sales to finance moving manufacturing, operations, and jobs overseas. The network's agents on Wall Street facilitate the export of capital, and those in Washington, D.C. support it with tax advantages, investment credits, and legal cover. The adage that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, is only too true. Our founding fathers built the mechanisms of checks and balances into our republic. What they failed to foresee was the emergence of transnational corporations. The transnational corporations are the principal vessels the Alpha Network employs to exercise its power. Transnational corporations exist outside and sit atop the federal government in such a way as to ensure the advancement of their special interests. They can do this because the judicial branch granted corporations the status of personhood 150 years ago. Corporations are not citizens, they are not patriots, but they do have interests, and those interests are accommodated with financial and legal advantages. These special interests are the interests most represented by our representatives in the three branches of our government. That is why American representative democracy isn't representative of the people's interests anymore. The corporate model of a strong autocratic executive, with a hand-picked board of directors, obedient executives/managers, and a compliant workforce is the vision the Alpha Network is using to drive the redesign of the U.S. government's executive branch. It is noteworthy that the current administration runs like a transnational corporation and that the only times President Bush has expressed respect for the legislative or judicial branches is when they do what he wants. Otherwise, they are obstructionists who are failing to carry out what he believes their constitutional responsibilities to be. Wall Street is the nexus through which the wealth of the nation's citizens and the principal transnational corporations invariably move. Its investment bankers and financial brokers have control of trillions of dollars, and as the Alpha Network's money changers, they collect a fee for every financial transaction, and they control America's capital. Alpha Network principals move to and from Wall Street, the Treasury, Commerce, Congress, and transnational corporate executive positions to establish and implement national debt levels, interest rates, money supply, mergers and acquisitions, and the like. As long as our saving, investment, and retirement funds flow through Wall Street, the Alpha Network brokers and bankers will not only take a significant percentage off the top, but they will also decide where and how the bulk of that money is invested. The media was originally entrusted with the responsibility of representing the public interest, but now bombards the public with the messages the network wishes it to see and hear. The concentration of programming power in the hands of half a dozen media moguls has, over the past decade, resulted in the intentional shaping of the public consciousness. The shaping relies on partial truths, superficial arguments, and distorted facts presented in tilted debates. The broadcast media, using the publicly owned airwaves, make billions from beer companies, tobacco companies, and other transnational corporations. The federal government consists of Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court, which advance transnational corporate special interests in legislative action, executive dictates, and judicial rulings. Near equal polarization in the general population, congressional careerism, federal legislation, and edict in conjunction with aggressive redistricting do not bode well for political moderation or compromise. It is now obvious that the Alpha Network will increasingly advance its interests at the expense of women's reproductive choice, civil rights, affirmative action, the environment, minorities, energy conservation, and the separation of church and state. A new partisan federalism, whose sole purpose is to enact conservative federal laws to negate state laws with which it disagrees, will increasingly nullify democratic initiatives at the state level. Over 250 years ago, Thomas Paine warned us, the right of voting for representatives is the primary right by which all other rights are protected. To take away this right is to reduce a man to slavery.